why do we practice our instrument? Do you guys think? I practice because I heard of the 10,000 hour rule. So if you spend 10,000 hours practicing something, whether it's an instrument or drawing or something else, you become an expert. So at least that's what I heard. But if I think about it, I can't do the math right now, but I have been playing the piano since 4. And I practice pretty much every day. Like if I think about it, like I've completed at least some portion of the 10,000 hours, right? But I feel like I'm like nowhere near the expert point. I feel like it's still really, really far away. And then I started to think, also a lot of people have doubted this theory because it's not the matter of actually how much time you spend repeating and practicing an instrument. It's about the quality of the repetitions. So this is something that I have been trying to figure out, is how to make every repetition in our practice sessions count. Because have you guys ever like experienced going to the practice room thinking, I'm gonna just focus on this one section that's been bothering me for the longest time, and then I spend like 15 to 20 minutes just doing this. And sometimes I get my phone out, and then I do this. Yeah, this is, I believe, I'm not the only one that does this, but are these repetitions actually efficient, and do they actually contribute to our learning and or memorizing that allows us to play on stage? So this is a really bad picture, but it's okay. When we're practicing, we're actually making these neural connections within our neurons. We're forming these electrical to chemical to electrical connections between the synapses of these neurons. And for example, when we play the neurons that control my 5 fingers from my thumb to the pinky is controlled by one group of neurons, and the neurons that control how I hear these sounds is another group of neurons. So if I play these notes over and over and over and over again, then the connections between these neurons will get stronger and stronger, and this is how neuroplasticity works. And the fact that we practice is actually we're just building these connections to make it stronger, that allows us to play on stage without like consciously thinking about the notes or about how we play them. So when it's been really frustrating in the practice room playing this piece over and over again, but then still tripping during performances. And I was just really, I wanted to explore from a memory point of view, and not just, for example, if I ask my teacher, why do I still choke on stage? Why do I practice so much, but I still choke on stage? And then the answers that I frequently get is, you need to practice more. But this is just really frustrating. So I wanted to know the mechanism behind it. I wanted to know why we, why is our memory like so vulnerable to stress? And this is a blog that I first encountered, written by Professor Louis Svard. So she's been playing the piano for his entire life, basically. And then for the past 15 years, she's been doing neuroscience research. And this really fascinates me because there's really someone out there that's willing to explore these nuances of how to better practice instead of just relying on pure empiricism and like what your teachers tell you to do. So this is a chart of the types of human memory that we know so far. I'll just briefly go over it. Sensory memory is when, for example, when we see a car pass by, but then we don't pay attention to it. So after about a few seconds, it fades from my memory. And short-term memory is when, for example, this car has a hot air balloon hanging from the top of the car. And you've never seen this before, so you pay attention to it. But after about 10 minutes or so, this also fades away from your memory because after a while, like if you don't rehearse it, if you don't go over and over again, like if you don't rehearse this event over and over again, it doesn't get stored in your long-term memory. So the sole purpose, so our goal is to get the music into our long-term memory because this is really what enables us. It's what we have the most capacity of, is our long-term memory. And long-term memory is split into explicit and implicit memory. So explicit is, for example, I can tell you how to play a piece. I can tell you this part you need to move your fingers in a certain way, and that's explicit memory. But then on stage, you need to get rid of this as explicit memory even because really you're trying to let the music flow out of you. And that's part of implicit memory. It's unconscious, and that's because we have practiced it for long enough that the connections between the neurons allows us to play it without like consciously thinking about it. So, based on knowledge of memory, why can't we divide the process of when we see a piece for the very first time, till we can play it effortlessly on stage? I divided it into 3 stages. So the first stage is sight reading. This stage is pretty simple. It's basically just knowing the notes. And its purpose is to encode the notes from short-term memory to your long-term memory. And it came to me so for example, when I first see a piece, I have the tendency to play it from top to bottom for the first time. But then, when I close the book, I can't remember anything. Like if you ask me, I can probably remember the melody because it's the most, I've heard it for a lot of times. But if you ask me what's the note in the left hand on bar 5, I won't be able to tell you. So how much can we encode at a time? Or in other words, what's the most efficient interval that for us to memorize the piece like more efficiently? So George A. Miller, he identifies the capacity of our short-term memory to 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. And what does this mean? PC, VM, XVM, and then go back. Can you guys recall it? Yeah. And PC, VM, XVM, WX, VOX, PS4. Okay, probably not. I hope not. But PC, BMX, BMW, Xbox, PS4. Easier than the previous one. So, what this 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information means is just that if we group a long series of seemingly irrelevant things into 7 plus or minus 2 meaningful chunks, then we'll be able to memorize it easier. So this is a really cute piece by Debussy. It's from his Sweet Bergamasque #4. So it sounds like this. I also only started sight reading this piece, so I'm not really good at it either. Sounds like this. And so when I saw this piece for the first time, I was like, what is this left hand? It's so hard to memorize. But if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you group the 8 notes in bar 5 into one meaningful chunk, and that's because your hand doesn't need to move. It stays in the same position on the keyboard. And then you move it for bar 6. And these two become 2 meaningful chunks. Becomes easier to memorize. So a lot of the times when we struggle to be familiarized with the piece, in Chinese we say it like 我练不熟这首曲子. It's like no matter how many times I sight read it, I still need to go back to the music and look at which note I need to play. So I feel like the reason why we can't play it fluently enough is because we have to look at the note every time we don't remember which note is at which position. So stage 2. Stage 2 is very, very important because it allows us to play a piece correctly. And this is the purpose of why we take classes with our teachers, is to learn the right way to play a section. And the purpose of it is to consolidate explicit memory, which is memory that you can tell. And in my perspective, I think there are 3 really, really important aspects to consider while we learn how to correctly play this part. And the first one, and the most important one, being auditory memory. Because in terms of playing an instrument, the end goal is to produce pleasant sound. So everything we do stems from this end goal. So once we know what the right sound is, and we might not know it for the first time, we have to experiment with our movements, with our muscle movements, in order to achieve that right sound that we want to produce. And when I'm playing the piano, when I'm playing the piece that I just played, for example, I experimented with so many different muscular movements to achieve different, because the sound of my voice changed and kind of evolved as I played this piece for a longer time. So that's another point that I'll be covering later. So consider these 3 elements when you're learning the right way to play a piece. And then entering stage 3, which is repetition. And repetition is really the most prominent thing that we do in the practice room. Once we have established, once we know exactly how to play a section correctly, we need to repeat it in the most efficient way, which goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning of this seminar. How do we make our repetitions count? So there has been a lot of many different ways to, at least when I'm doing my research, there has been a lot of suggested ways to make repetitions less boring and less repetitive. And I compiled the things I saw into these 2 principles. So imagine that you're eating a burger, and the first bite is always better than all of the other bites. That is because our brain is wired in this way that it's like really easy to lose attention and it gets bored very, very easily. So if we're playing a piece, if we're playing a section over and over and over and over and over again, we're not really doing this problem solving. We're not doing this retrieval of memory. We're only like encoding the whatever that we're repeating over and over again, and our brain just loses focus. This is why a lot of the times, including myself, we lose, like we're like, I'm not really focused today when I'm practicing, or I lose attention so easily. And that's when you probably need to consider if you're doing the same thing too much over and over again. And the second principle is challenge. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the novelty part. It's because if we're playing something over and over again without really changing anything, your brain just kind of gets accustomed to what you're doing, and it's not being challenged. So you're not really learning anything new. So distributive practice is one of the methods that I found most helpful in my personal practice. What it is basically, so imagine you have 15 minutes of practice time. And what I'll do before is that I'll just spend the 15 minutes doing whatever I can to get this excerpt A done, because I just want to get it done. But research shows that based on our brain's ability to like adapt to one thing and then just stop learning, basically, this distributive practice spaces this 15 minutes out into 5 3-minute sections. So, and in these 3 minutes, we focus on excerpt A, B, C, A, B. So why are we doing this switching? The reason why we're doing this switching is because every time we switch to this excerpt, we need to rethink the way we play it. And this rethinking process is actually just the way that you're challenging your brain, and you're making your brain doing this problem-solving process once again. So I talked about most of the benefits, and then I want to talk about the concept of retrieval and encoding again, because this is really important, not only in terms of playing an instrument, but also when we're studying for a test, for example. A lot of times when we read textbooks, it might feel like we know the information pretty well already because we're reading it and we understand it. But then when you close the book and you go to your test, a lot of the stuff becomes super unclear and you don't really remember. That's because when we're reading, we're doing the process of encoding. We're putting the information into our brains. But what you really need to do, whether it's in a test or on the stage, it's memory retrieval. You need to get the information out of your brain. So using distributive practice, you're constantly, between those 3-minute intervals, you're practicing retrieval instead of encoding. Okay, so using the example of this, I want to kind of show you guys how to execute the stages that I mentioned. This is the very beginning of the piece that I just played. This part is a pain in the butt. It's very, very hard. Like, I spent so much time just... So to practice this bar using the method that I just talked about, first, we need to find a chunk, and we've already done that. And second is find the even smaller problem unit. And this is the part where I feel like a lot of my friends tend to neglect in their practice sessions, is they'll just repeat the bigger chunk over and over again, but they're not sensitive enough to figuring out which like between which two notes is the problem occurring. And for me, it was the third and the fourth 16th note. And the last and the next note after that. So once you've narrowed down to this small problem unit, you can start repeating. But then you need to figure out what's the cause of this problem unit to sound bad. And for me, it was probably like when I was playing this part, my fingers like tense up. So I play it like really just unclearly. And and then you can slow practice in order to familiarize with the new method. After you have really the confidence that you know how to play this bar correctly, which is stage 2, you can enter stage 3. So stage 3 is just repeat the problem unit using the correct method and repeat the entire chunk, which is adding context to the problem unit. So once I play this bar, these 3 notes, like confidently enough, I can and add the context. And this process may be like really frustrating because once you've added the context, your brain kind of just like goes to the way you played it before. And so this is really something that we need to have patience with and modify and fix the problem that we used to have. So stage 2 and 3 are two interchanging, like they're continuously interchanging because we're continuously learning new methods and new ways to play a certain bar. And every time, believe it or not, every time we change something, we're rewiring our brains in a way. So this is the part about practicing that's so hard, is because we're basically, our muscles are so tiny. Like our muscles about playing the piano is like these tiny muscles in our fingers. And when we're like playing a wind instrument, these tiny muscles in our face. So in order to play something better, you change your muscle movement in a really, really tiny way. And we need to practice those. So, but as we learn the better methods, I found that the number of repetitions actually would decrease because once we find a better method to play a bar, it actually becomes easier to our muscles. That so the easiest examples is this. If I play it like super tensely, then I probably need to repeat like 100 times in order to play it good. But if I play it with with almost no tension, and then maybe leaning towards the right a little bit, and to stress the voicing, it really alleviates some of the pressure from the muscles, so we're able to play it better, quicker. So for my last point, I want to discuss the concept of slow practicing. Is slow practicing really necessary? Have you guys ever been in the situation where you're practicing like an etude and the end goal is 160 beats per minute? And you wanna, and then today you might say, I'll start at 70. And then tomorrow I'll probably work up to 80. And then and then I'll go to 100. And then I'll go to 120. And then at some point, I'll maybe, for some magical reason, I'll be able to play at 160. At least that's what I've tried before. But so the books of the authors of these two books, one is Abby Whiteside on piano playing, and the other is The Science and Psychology of Music Performance. They suggested that slow practice and fast practice, you're actually using really different systems in your brain. You can think about it that way. So when you're slow practicing, you're practicing under steady sensory control. But when you're fast practicing, it has to be performed without online sensory feedback. So basically, when you're slow practicing, you can look at the keys and identify which notes to play. But then you can't do that when you're fast practicing. So this guy, Jason Solman, he's a trombonist in Juilliard, and he came up with the idea of chaining instead of slow practicing. And I'll show you guys a video of how he does it.
Video, but if you want to, it's here. So one more time, here's the lick I'm going to practice. Now, rather than slowing the tempo down, first thing I'm going to do is something called forwards chaining. And that's where I start at the front of the lick, and I'm just going to add one note at a time. So let's set our tempo here. Okay, so this is 125 beats a minute, and I am using my metronome program that has beats randomly removed. If you want to know more information about why I think that's important, you can check out my innovative practice tools where I have metronome CDs available, all sorts of information on why I think that's a great way to do it. But we got 125 beats a minute going here, so I'm going to start at the beginning, one note, and just keep adding.
You guys get the idea. So personally for me, I found this really helpful because I'm able to not just, it alleviates the frustration of like being stuck at, for example, 140 and not being able to work it any up further, but it also kind of like, it helps me to really narrow the problem down into one or two notes and then just working those one or two notes. But does it mean that slow practice is completely unnecessary? I think no. I think the sole purpose of slow practicing is to familiarize yourself with the correct method of playing this section. Because, like I said, we're continuously learning new ways of playing a difficult spot. And every time we learn something new, we need time to rewire our brain to get familiarized with that new method. So slow practicing is really, really necessary in that stage. So my summary would be the sole purpose of slow practicing is to familiarize with the correct method, which is in stage 2, not during repetition to establish implicit memory, which is stage 3. Okay, so we're officially in the last part, the very last part of our presentation, and that's how I want to emphasize how important sleep is in terms of consolidating memory, because when we're sleeping, we have these, as you guys might know, we have this 4 stages of sleep, and you can think about it as when we're during the stage that we're dreaming, we're consolidating explicit memory. So 1 + 1 = 2. And during the stage before the stage that we're dreaming, we're consolidating our implicit memory. So get your sleep, guys. It's very important. Sometimes when you find yourself stuck in the practice room, maybe just like go home and sleep, and the next day it'll be so much better. Thank you.